About 10 years ago, we were living up in Mesa, wonderful rim country, and when you live in a more rural type of setting, you kind of deal with what's there in the environment, whether it be a couple of gas stations, a fast food restaurant, a grocery store. However, up in Mesa, there was this fine department store. It had everything from food and jewelry, sports, electronics. Maybe you've heard of this fine department store called Walmart. Of course you have. Now, we are all creatures of habit, and it seems like we kind of stay in those habits of where we like to shop and things we like to purchase. I found as we moved down to over the Phoenix area that I continued shopping at that wonderful department store, even though I had multiple other places I could shop. Going to that one with a big red dot on it, it just kind of gave me the creepies, to go in there. I wanted a place that seemed more raw and real, and so I started going to my favorite department store and shopping at Walmart one day. I was looking for a bag of charcoal, and I couldn't find it in the picnic supplies where they keep the plates and things like that. I couldn't find it over in the food section, so finally I noticed one of the associates. She was working over the clothing section. She was having to hit some of the lower shelves because she was in a wheelchair. Now, I don't want to stereotype associates at Walmart, but I've noticed that at times it seems as if we overlook the associates in places like Walmart, that they're just there to make ends meet. Well, I went up to her, and as kind of crazy as I can be at sometimes, I decided to ask one of those smart aleck questions, and I said to her casually, I said, if I were a bag of charcoal, where would I be? And she paused. She smiled, and she looked up at me, and she said, you'd be in the garden section. The garden section, come to think of it, wow, the promised land of where I needed to go to get my charcoal so I could go home and cook my carnage. But it wasn't just that moment that allowed me to make my purchase at my favorite department store. It became a moment of promise. A moment of promise when this associate's presence became acknowledged, that she had a sense of value in that moment to serve me as an associate for the company. She was no longer a sense of a commodity. She was realized for her value and her worth and her contribution to the greater team. Now, my relationship to Walmart is no different than anyone else's relationship to Walmart. We can choose to shop there if we don't, or if we want to, we can continue not to shop there. Some people choose actively not to shop at places like Walmart because of how they treat their employees. Low wages, hardly any vacation, no benefits or anything in that respect. I know one Walmart had to put up baskets that was collecting food for their associates because they didn't have Thanksgiving dinners. It's one of those companies you want to scowl at and say, forget about you, Mr. Walton. But then there's also the other perspective of saying, you know what? Maybe we can shop at places like Walmart because the people that work there are just trying to make a living like you and me. And the voice that we can have as people of faith is to go and to shop there and to remind a person of their value and how they are helping me get through the day and the needs that I have, creating a sense of presence and making it a better place for them to work by acknowledging them as someone of worth. I want to start with an observation and a dilemma that seems to be around us. It seems like we still live in a world today that harkens back to the time of Pharaoh, the time of slavery in Egypt's land, where there was this whole sense of expansion of kingdoms, of a realm that was around creating collateral profit that was brought upon the shoulders of the workers. Furthermore, today we serve a Pharaoh, but instead of calling it slavery, we now call it consumerism. We crave the best. We want the biggest things that we believe that we cannot live without. Now, I know there's a few that can say, you know what, I'm happy with what I've had since when, it works just fine for me. But for many, we seem to want what's bigger, what's better. And we place ourselves in situations in which we have to meet that supply and demand within our own personal whims in life. I see it, I want it, and I'm getting it. And if the old thing breaks down, forget about getting it fixed. It's going in the trash because there's a better one at that point. It's been said by a theologian by the name of Walter Brueggemann, and I'm quoting him, that we have a love affair with more. And we will never have enough. Consumerism is not simply a marketing strategy. He continues that consumerism has become a demonic, spiritual force among us. And the questions that we face as a church is whether the gospel has the power to help us withstand it all. God help us all. So how do we overcome this dilemma? Well, if you'll give Bob and I the liberty over the next few weeks here to maybe pull some suggestions out of our grocery cart here, we might be able to come up with those solutions as we frame it within a metaphor over the next few weeks titled Graceful Giving in a Walmart World. You see, over the next few weeks here, we want to explore the notions of consumption and production in our society as we prayerfully consider how we are called to respond to God's generous abundance in our lives and how we, in turn, hand that out through graceful giving. Now, here's the fine print. If you're new to First Church, and maybe if you're a guest for the first time, I know you probably go from one church to the other. You keep hearing the same message over and over again. They're always asking for, guess what? We're asking for money. So hold on to your vote at this point. Let the jury still stay in recess. Over the next few weeks, we're not talking about money. We're talking about a generous heart that God calls us to extend to others, and that we as a church, as a community of faith, have the benefit of being the benefactors of those gifts. The story of Exodus, as we start hearing it brought forth this morning here, reminds us of slavery in Egypt and a covenant that God made with the people of Israel at Mount Sinai. It's a pattern of going from captivity to deliverance, and how this occurs over and over again throughout the biblical narrative, as well as in the lives of people today. The Exodus tells the story of God entering into the economy of its time. And what occurs through then happens in an economy of people suffering, where God hears the cries of the people. A relationship then, or a connection, seems to emerge as the story reveals God's response to people who are in need. This relationship identifies Pharaoh as the exploiter of commodities. And the Israelites, who are seen as the slaves, are the exploited ones. And then there's Yahweh, who becomes the equalizer or the deliverer of this captivity. God intercedes on behalf of the Israelites with Moses, who then becomes the mouthpiece before Pharaoh to bring God's promise of hope to a people without hope, who are caught in this endless cycle of production, of mass consumption, particularly that of Pharaoh's. And we begin to see something that just looks a little bit familiar in the 21st century. Just ask those people who work for Walmart. More hours, less pay, less benefits. Stomp that hay, mix the mud, work, consume, produce. I want, I get, I have. So at the burning bush, God calls to Moses with a voice, provides a sense of presence, of hope and deliverance. And God identifies three things that God sees amongst the people of Israel. First, God has seen their misery in which they are having to endure and be subjected to. God has heard the cries of the anguish. How long, O Lord, must we endure? And then God has also known, because God has been present with the Israelites in the midst of their troubles. Therefore, through Moses, God's presence is revealed. God brings deliverance not only from something, but to someone. God parts the aisles of the situation in which the Israelites are subjected to and reminds them of the God who is with them. It's a pattern that is still repeated today through the employment of people who are held captive to this consumerist culture, who appear to have no means of deliverance but new opportunities. For example, where is the promised land? Where is a debt-free life? Where is a life that would just recognize me for my sense of identity and worth? I believe God's parables are always before us. And not too long ago, we were in a Fry's grocery store waiting for a prescription in a pharmacy. And we started looking kind of around the store there. We could see people coming up and down the aisles. And we noticed this mother pushing her son in a wheelchair. Now, the son had some mittens on his hands to prevent him from scratching himself. He had a helmet on his head so that he wouldn't bump his head and cause any injury. He had a rope that was fastened to the wheelchair so that it would prevent him from falling over. So with one hand, she was pushing her son in the wheelchair, and the other she was dragging a grocery cart behind her. Now, that wasn't a sight that really caught the matter, but it was really the words that I started to hear as a stranger from out of nowhere came up to the woman and started to chastise her for the neglect and how she was treating her son. How dare you tie him up with a rope? This is terrible how you're treating him. Look how you've got his hands bound and that thing on his head. She just kept going on and on. The mother pulling the grocery cart and pushing her son, getting the items that they needed for their home. The woman kept following her and yelling at the top of her voice, in which then she pulls out her cell phone, calls 911, and asks for the police to come and check the situation out. The police come. They listen to the woman again and say, how can this mother tie up this kid in a chair and treat him like a nothing? The officers do what they do best, and they listen. So they also listen to the mother, her concerns, her needs, and having to care for her son. And then they talk to the concerned citizen who made the phone call, and they tell her, everything's fine. This mother's just trying to make the day go by. The person had her voice heard. And so people went about their business, grabbed our prescription, and I went home. And then it was really the next day that I started to feel this whack on the back of my head, as God's Spirit kept on saying to me over and over again, Rennick, why didn't you do something? Why couldn't you be a voice in the midst of this? Why were you just like there, like everyone else, watching and gawking? This story continues and reminds us of redemption, of wholeness, and the value of individuals, because a few days later, Dustin and I were back at that grocery store, and we were shopping, and I saw the mother with her son, and they were in the checkout line where you get to do it yourself. It's kind of on-the-job training if you ever want to work in a grocery store. You think it goes faster when you're going through there, but you ever notice it takes forever to get the barcode to read? But there she was. I said, oh my goodness, Dustin, look. He's like, wow. I said, give me a moment, Dustin. So I went up to that mother and I said, hi. My name's David. I didn't tell her what I do for, during the day. It kind of scares people. There's two things. When you go to a party, you don't want to tell them that you're, a minister, and then the other one, sorry, Brad, that you're an attorney. So, those are conversation enders right there. But I told this mother, I said how much I admired her for the other day, and I said I just stood there and watched, and I didn't do anything. But you being here today says something to me, that you won't be scared away, even in the midst of other people's uncertainties and their own wanting to fill their own needs. So I thanked her. And I said, I can't tell you how many times I've been in the store and my voice had acted out and people are gawking at us. I thanked her for her moment, for her testimony, and for reminding both of us that we could feel normal in the space of God's grace and a chance to recognize one another for just who we are. This month we respond to God's life and love, God's transforming element to our community, to our financial gifts. It's a churchy word we call stewardship, but it's a reminder that even beyond our monetary resources, we hold within our hands a means to bring transformation, a realization, an honor of a human being into the midst of who we are as a community, that we can make this a better place to live. Earlier I posed this dilemma that we live in a culture that's very similar to the days of Pharaoh, but we have a choice. We can either succumb to this captivity in our lives, or we can lend ourselves to be God's agents of hope and deliverance. Moses didn't sign up for this gig. Half the time we don't either. But within the very voice that God puts in our hearts and within our mouths, we too can gracefully give of ourselves in this all-consuming world, that we can bring forth God's promised land today. We too are God's agents and God's presence in this world. Together we move forward not only in word but in action. We are the presence of a living faith for our community and for the world. We are presence of loving life through Jesus Christ to a land of promise where the steps begin here today. I invite you this month to prayerfully consider how God is leading you, how God is leading us to live out graceful giving. To do something faithfully that we've always wanted to do, but only done so in hindsight. And in that we'll discover that even in the garden section, we can find a burning bush before us. Let the people sing. Amen.